It was way past midnight, and I was completely locked in, blasting away at enemies in my game. I was happily coordinating with my healer when my phone suddenly rang, and on the other end was none other than the ice-cold CEO, calling to break up with me. My brain nearly overheated trying to process what the hell she was talking about. Because seriously, when did the two of us ever even date? Unless my memory had suddenly gotten nerfed just a few months earlier. All I had done was accept her friend request. That was until she showed up at my place one night, apparently drunk and running on pure impulse. That was when I noticed her phone wallpaper was actually a picture of me. Turns out the supposedly untouchable ice-cold CEO was secretly a hopeless romantic. But back then, I was simply sitting in front of my computer, completely absorbed in another friendly gaming session with my healer. Then my phone suddenly started ringing. One glance at the caller ID told me exactly who it was. The ice-cold CEO. My hand immediately slipped. I almost dropped my mouse like an absolute NPC. Who the hell calls an ordinary employee this late at night? Why was the CEO personally calling a nobody like me after midnight? My first thought was that she had somehow discovered me slacking off and watching videos at work last week. Maybe I had finally been caught. Maybe she was calling to make my life miserable. With my heart already pounding, I nervously picked up. I greeted her as respectfully as possible because there was no way I was going to mess this up. I cautiously asked what instructions she had for me. There was complete silence on the other end, so quiet that I could actually hear her breathing. Several seconds passed like that. Then a strangely fragile voice finally came through. Her voice was normally crisp and commanding, but this time there was an unmistakable weakness underneath it. She softly called my name, Fang Yan. I immediately identified myself and reminded her that I was on the line. She hesitated for a moment, and then, as if she had finally forced herself to make an enormous decision, she told me she wanted to break up. I genuinely thought I had heard her wrong. I instinctively pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it. The words made absolutely no sense, while the caller ID still displayed the ice-cold CEO's name. I froze for a solid 2 seconds. At that point, I seriously wondered if staying up too late gaming had finally caused me to hallucinate. I pressed the phone back against my ear. I was now listening with 100% confusion and absolutely zero understanding of what was happening. I carefully addressed her as Miss Bai and asked whether she had accidentally called the wrong person. I reminded her that I was Fang Yan from the planning department. I was the guy from last Monday's meeting, the unfortunate employee whose ugly PowerPoint presentation had been roasted by her in front of everyone. Another stretch of silence followed. All I could hear was her breathing, as if she had just been hit by a critical emotional damage combo. Then, a few seconds later, the call abruptly ended. I stood there holding my phone, completely frozen in place. The air conditioner was blowing cold air over me, while my brain was having a full system crash. What kind of situation was this where a CEO called an ordinary employee in the middle of the night? And somehow I had just received a breakup call from a woman I had never even dated. Was this some brand new corporate ritual I had somehow missed? I scratched my head in confusion. Then I went back to my computer. My teammates were already roasting me in voice chat for disappearing in the middle of the match. But honestly, I couldn't care less anymore. The beautiful face of Bai Ningbing, the woman whose looks could stop traffic, yet whose icy expression could probably freeze an entire server, kept flashing through my mind like some cursed loading screen. Why the hell was she breaking up with me? We had never even been together. The number of times we had actually interacted could practically be counted on one hand. So was I actually about to lose my job? Or was I secretly some lost heir from a ridiculously wealthy family? Maybe I had some absurd childhood marriage contract with her. I spent 10 whole minutes trying to connect the dots and still got absolutely nowhere. Eventually, I decided there was no point trying to understand the mind of a boss. I simply chalked it up to the ice-cold CEO having a midnight mental breakdown. So I decided to forget about it and get back to conquering the battlefield. But the moment I put my headset back on, my doorbell suddenly rang. Ding dong! Ding dong! Whoever was outside kept pressing it like the building was on fire. I had no idea who would show up this late, but I reluctantly got up and went to open the door. The instant I opened it, a wave of cold night air rushed inside. A faint, familiar fragrance drifted in with it. And then I saw Bai Ningbing standing outside my apartment in a ridiculous pink dinosaur pajama set. Her normally perfect hair was slightly messy. Her cheeks were noticeably flushed. And somehow, the ice-cold CEO was standing right at my front door. Those eyes that normally looked like they could freeze anyone on sight were completely different now. They were watery as she stared straight at me, and suddenly I felt my entire body tense up. I was so shocked that I nearly slammed the door straight into her face. I stammered her name, and even my voice cracked from pure disbelief. I demanded to know how she had even found out where I lived. She didn't answer. Instead, she simply stepped straight into my apartment. She turned around and shut the door behind her. The movement was clean and decisive, carrying the same overwhelming dominance she always had. Then she slowly turned back toward me. I instinctively backed away, until my back hit the shoe cabinet and I had nowhere left to retreat. She tilted her head up and stared directly into my eyes. The tears shimmering in her eyes made my heart start pounding like I had just triggered a boss fight. Then she called my name again. But this time, her voice was even weaker than it had been over the phone. Her voice was unusually soft, with just a hint of a playful, almost spoiled tone. I swallowed hard and asked where she was, my throat suddenly feeling dry. My heart was pounding so loudly that I could practically hear every beat. Then she suddenly reached out. Her hand grabbed the collar of my pajamas in one swift motion. She gave it a firm downward pull. I was forced to bend forward. Our faces were suddenly close enough that I could almost touch the tip of her nose. I could clearly see her face from that distance, even the slight tremble of her long curled eyelashes. Our breaths mixed in the tiny space between us. Every muscle in my body instantly tensed. My brain completely stopped functioning. And then, I heard her speak in that familiar, cold, domineering voice. Only this time, she was addressing me with absolute certainty. She declared that tonight, she was going to make me her one and only boyfriend. Wait, what? Someone please explain what kind of insane side quests I had just been dragged into. I practically turned to stone right there. My brain's CPU was smoking, and it still couldn't process this ridiculous situation. Nothing about what was happening made even the slightest bit of logical sense. But Bai Ningbing didn't loosen her grip on my collar. If anything, she tightened it even more. The strength in her grip was honestly terrifying. I tried to get her attention and calm things down. I desperately tried to make my voice work again. I asked whether there had been some gigantic misunderstanding between us. I begged her to calm down so we could talk this through rationally. She narrowed those beautiful eyes at me, clearly unconvinced by my explanation. The corners of her eyes were still slightly red. She reminded me that only 10 minutes earlier, I had supposedly rejected her attempt to break up with me. I tried to explain that I hadn't rejected anything. I was simply checking whether she'd called the wrong person. She wasn't interested in hearing another word, and her free hand suddenly lifted toward me. Her cool fingertips gently brushed across my cheek. I tried to explain that some things simply couldn't be cleared up over a phone call. Her voice dropped lower. She decided that if words weren't enough, she would make sure I understood in person. Then she grabbed my collar again and started dragging me toward my bedroom. I couldn't believe what was happening. I was a grown man standing over 6 feet tall, and I wasn't exactly wasting my time at the gym either. Yet somehow, this woman was dragging me around like I weighed absolutely nothing. Was her drunken strength actually this terrifying? Or had I accidentally unlocked a hidden boss phase? I called out her name again. I urged her to wake up and come to her senses, but I didn't dare struggle too violently. The last thing I wanted was to hurt her. She immediately insisted that she was completely sober. Before I could figure out what to do, she had dragged me beside the bed. Then she gave me a firm shove. My balance disappeared instantly. I fell backward onto my large bed, landing squarely on the blue sheets. The mattress bounced beneath me. She followed the motion and climbed onto the edge of the bed. She knelt beside me, looking down at me with the full authority of a final boss. The bedroom light behind her outlined her figure with a faint halo. Even the oversized eyes on her ridiculous little dinosaur pajamas seemed to stare straight at me. Meanwhile, I had absolutely no idea where I was supposed to look. I tried calling her name again. I reminded her that forcing a relationship wasn't exactly going to end well. Her movements suddenly stopped. She leaned closer until her long eyelashes were almost brushing against my face. Then she confidently suggested that there was only one way to find out whether I'd like it. Hearing that kind of shameless pickup line from the supposedly untouchable CEO completely short-circuited me. I froze like my character had just disconnected from the server. My mind was already running through 1,000 impossible scenarios. Somehow, I was even imagining a future where I'd be driving luxury cars and living in a mansion. She looked at my completely stunned expression, and suddenly her eyes curved into a small, almost mischievous smile. Then she slowly lowered her head. Before I could react, she kissed me. My brain instantly went completely blank. For a moment, all I could register was the warmth of the brief contact. She actually kissed me. The same woman who ruled the company with an iron fist, the terrifyingly cold CEO everyone feared, had just kissed me. For a moment, the entire world went silent. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding ridiculously loud in my chest. I could also hear her breathing, slightly quicker than before. Then, without warning, her body suddenly went limp. She collapsed against me and stopped moving. Her head came to rest against my shoulder, and she didn't seem interested in moving again. A few seconds later, her breathing became slow and steady. Then came the tiniest, most unexpected snore. I stiffly turned my head. And there she was, completely sprawled across me. The terrifying CEO was sleeping peacefully like an oversized house cat. I couldn't help wondering whether she realized how irresponsible this whole situation was. Now, I had absolutely no idea what I was supposed to do. Was I seriously supposed to throw my own CEO out of my apartment? Meanwhile, Bai Ningbing was sleeping on top of me so peacefully that she looked completely unaware of the chaos she'd created. Her tiny snores even came in a surprisingly rhythmic pattern. Her breathing remained perfectly steady. Every gentle breath brushed against my neck. And somehow, that soft sensation felt almost like a feather brushing against my skin. The sensation tickled my neck so much that I didn't dare move an inch. I had no idea where to put my hands or feet without making things even more awkward. Inside my head, two tiny versions of me were already fighting like it was a championship match. Eventually, I decided there was no point arguing with the drunk woman who clearly had no idea what she was doing. So, I carefully tried to move her off me without waking her up. But the instant I moved, she let out an unhappy little hum. Her arms instinctively tightened around my neck. She even rubbed her head against the crook of my neck. She looked exactly like a spoiled cat refusing to let go of its favorite human. My entire body instantly went rigid. I couldn't help wondering where the legendary cold and intimidating CEO persona had disappeared to. Why had she suddenly become this clingy? At that point, I simply surrendered. I didn't dare move again. I just lay there and accepted my fate, apparently becoming her personal human pillow. I stared blankly at the ceiling light above me. And naturally, I started questioning every decision that had brought me here. How had my life gone from a normal gaming night to this absolute disaster? One minute, I was receiving a completely nonsensical breakup call. And now, I had the ice-cold CEO sleeping on top of me. How many chapters of this story had somehow been skipped between those two events? I desperately searched through every memory I had of my interactions with Bai Ningbing at the company. The basic facts were painfully simple. She was the CEO, and I was just a low-level employee. Sure, she was unbelievably beautiful. And I wasn't exactly ugly myself. I mean, I'd say I was at least a few tiers above average. But aside from the time she roasted me for making an ugly PowerPoint, I couldn't remember any meaningful connection between us. We had barely even spoken to each other privately. So why had she suddenly decided to break up with me? And more importantly, why was she now determined to make me her exclusive boyfriend? Then, an absolutely ridiculous theory suddenly popped into my head. Maybe she secretly had a long-lost twin sister who was completely different from her. No, that plot was way too ancient even for a manhwa. Modern stories had already evolved past that kind of nonsense. The more I thought about it, the more tangled my thoughts became. And then right at that moment, the phone she had left in her jacket pocket beside the bed suddenly lit up. The screen flashed once. In the dim bedroom, that tiny glow immediately caught my attention. A message preview had appeared on the screen. It was from her best friend, Su-ya. The message casually asked how things were going. The rest of the message was cut off, but I could already see enough to know something was seriously suspicious. My heart suddenly jumped, and my inner gossip demon awakened at full power. Her phone wasn't locked. The screen was just sitting there, completely exposed. My hands started trembling. Slowly, almost against my own will, I reached toward the phone. My rational side immediately told me this was wrong. Unfortunately, my curiosity absolutely bodied my common sense. I told myself I would only take one look. I just needed to confirm whether my suspicion was actually correct. My fingertip finally touched the cold phone screen. My heart was pounding like someone had started beating drums inside my chest as I picked it up. I took a deep breath. Then I opened the message. The full conversation instantly appeared on the screen. Suye's message asked how the operation was going. She wanted to know if Bai Ningbing had managed to successfully win over that ridiculously handsome employee. Her friend was clearly dying for an update and had apparently been waiting forever for the sequel. The message ended with a playful little reaction. I froze. That ridiculously handsome employee she was talking about was me. So Bai Ningbing had been doing all of this on purpose? Had she and her best friend actually planned this whole thing together? Was even that bizarre breakup phone call part of their plan? My curiosity instantly went into overdrive. Without thinking twice, I wanted to open their chat history. I needed to know what other insane plans those two had cooked up behind my back. But then my finger slipped. Instead of opening the conversation, I accidentally hit the back button. The phone returned to its home screen. And that's when I saw the wallpaper. At that exact moment, I involuntarily stopped breathing for a second. My eyes widened. The wallpaper wasn't some glamorous portrait of herself. It wasn't a luxury car, a vacation spot, or some fancy landscape either. It was a photo of me. In the picture, I was wearing nothing more than a simple white t-shirt and jeans. I was standing outside the coffee shop beneath our company building. My head was lowered as I looked at my phone. The angle perfectly captured the sharp outline of my profile. Sunlight was falling directly across me, giving my entire body a soft golden glow. The camera angle was oddly specific, and there was absolutely no way I had known someone was taking that picture. Judging by my clothes, the photo seemed to have been taken sometime last month. I stood there holding her phone, completely stunned by the realization that the ice-cold CEO had secretly turned my photo into her wallpaper. She was literally using a picture of me as her phone background. The amount of information hitting me at once was insane. This mystery was somehow harder to solve than the final question on an impossible math exam. How long had she secretly liked me? And how the hell had I failed to notice any of it? So this whole thing tonight wasn't some random accident. It had been planned from the start. I looked down at the Ice Queen, CEO, who was still sleeping peacefully. There was even the faintest smile curling at the corner of her lips. She looked like she was having the sweetest dream of her life. Meanwhile, my mind was an absolute mess. I was shocked, confused, completely dumbfounded, and if I'm being honest, just a little flattered. But I also had about 1,000 questions, because who would have thought the terrifying Ice Queen CEO was secretly like this? That gap between her public persona and her private self nearly gave me emotional damage. Now I had two choices: wake her up and demand answers, or pretend I knew absolutely nothing. I was still staring at her sleeping face, trying to make sense of this ridiculous situation, when her eyelashes suddenly began to tremble. Those beautiful, slightly misty eyes slowly started to open. And then she finally woke up. Our eyes met. The entire room instantly went dead silent. And the worst part? I was still holding her phone. The screen was still displaying that wallpaper made from a picture of me. It was painfully obvious. For a moment, it felt like time itself had frozen. I stood there holding her phone. The screen was still glowing. She had just woken up, so she looked at me with completely unfocused eyes. Then she glanced at her phone. I watched her pupils go from sleepy confusion to sharp focus. Then she finally realized what was on the screen. Her eyes instantly went wide. The entire transformation took less than a second. Then she let out a tiny, startled squeak. She looked like a rabbit caught in a spotlight. She practically launched herself off me. The movement was so fast, it created its own wind. Her cheeks turned red right before my eyes. The redness spread all the way down her neck. At that point, she looked like a boiled shrimp. She pointed desperately at the phone in my hand. She was embarrassed beyond words. Even forming a sentence became a struggle. That cold, untouchable CEO image was completely gone. She demanded to know why I was looking at her phone. I immediately shoved it back into her coat pocket. I threw it back like I was handling a live grenade. Then I quickly sat up too. The awkwardness was so intense, I swear my toes could have dug out an entire apartment. Her phone suddenly lit up again. I immediately tried to explain that I'd only seen it by accident. I scrambled for an excuse. But my voice came out weak. And somehow, my explanation only made her voice rise even higher. She was embarrassed and annoyed at the same time. She couldn't even look me in the eye. She kept dodging my gaze like her life depended on it. And every second only reminded me of that ridiculous wallpaper. She finally snapped and called me a jerk. I hadn't even gotten a chance to defend myself. She was already too embarrassed to stay in the room. She stomped her foot in frustration. Then she turned around and tried to escape. I instinctively called out for her to wait. Before I even thought about it, I reached out and grabbed her wrist. The instant our skin touched, I realized just how slender her wrist was. Her skin was warm and incredibly soft. The two of us reacted like we'd both been hit by an electric shock. We both froze and shuddered at the same time. She immediately yanked her hand free. Her face was so red, I honestly expected smoke to start coming out. She hurriedly insisted that nothing had happened tonight. And she absolutely did not want me remembering any of it. She barely managed to get the words out. Then she practically sprinted toward the door. She fumbled with a handle before bolting out like she was escaping a crime scene. The door slammed shut behind her. And just like that, I was left sitting alone on the bed. I stared at the empty room in complete disbelief. What the hell had I just experienced tonight? First, I got an unexpected drunken confession from the Ice Queen CEO. And as if that wasn't enough, I had just discovered her gigantic secret crush on me. There was way too much information to process. My brain needed a full system reboot. I collapsed back onto the bed and stared blankly at the ceiling. So that breakup call earlier, had she done it on purpose? Or had it really been an accident? The wallpaper was definitely real. And the messages from her best friend were real too. Which meant all that tough, domineering behavior was basically a paper tiger. Inside, she had been freaking out the entire time. The more I remembered that embarrassed, red-faced escape, the more ridiculous the whole thing became. The terrifying Ice Queen I knew was practically a completely different person. I couldn't hold it in anymore, and the laugh escaped me. The more I thought about it, the funnier it got. Eventually, I gave up and rolled around on the bed while hugging my blanket. I couldn't stop laughing. Well, look at you, Ice Queen. You finally have your day. But now, I had a serious problem. What was I supposed to do? Should I pretend I knew absolutely nothing? That would have been easy if her phone wallpaper wasn't literally a picture of me. At this point, could I really keep pretending I hadn't seen it? Maybe I should just make the first move. Then again, she was still my boss. What if I embarrassed her too much and she completely snapped? For all I knew, she could send me straight to Africa to dig for diamonds. But then, I remembered the way her face had turned bright red like an apple. Something gently bumped against my heart. It was strange. A little ticklish, a little numb. And honestly, I didn't hate the feeling. In fact, I might have been a little attracted to her. I almost laughed at myself. Seriously, Fang Yan, you really refuse to suffer even a little, don't you? I'd actually started falling for my own boss. The next morning, I headed to work. But my mind was anything but calm. With every floor the elevator climbed, my heartbeat got faster. When I finally reached the planning department, I took a deep breath. Then I mentally prepared myself for battle. Come on, Fang Yan. Relax. Just act normal and pretend nothing happened. She was probably even more nervous than I was. I pushed the door open. Everything inside looked completely normal. Keyboard clicks and quiet discussions filled the department as everyone went about their work. I instinctively glanced toward the CEO's office. The door was closed, so I quickly returned to my desk. I turned on my computer, and somehow I couldn't read a single word on the screen. My entire brain was still replaying last night's events. Then my department supervisor suddenly called my name. He asked me to finalize the event proposal I'd prepared yesterday. Apparently, the final version had to be printed immediately. The CEO was about to hold a meeting and wanted to personally review it. The CEO wanted my proposal, and she was going to review it herself? I immediately sat up straight. I acknowledged my supervisor and got to work. I quickly found the file. Then I hit print. The printer started humming. I picked up the freshly printed proposal while it was still warm. Then I slowly walked toward the CEO's office. Before knocking, I took another deep breath. Then I knocked 3 times. Her cold voice immediately came from inside. There wasn't even a hint of emotion in it. I pushed the door open and walked in. The Ice Queen CEO was sitting behind her enormous desk. Her hair was perfectly arranged. Her makeup was flawless, and every detail of her appearance was immaculate. Her expression was colder than ice. Completely, she had fully transformed back into that untouchable CEO. It was almost impossible to believe that the shy, clingy woman from last night, the one who turned red and ran away, had actually been the same person sitting in front of me. She lifted her eyes and looked directly at me. Her expression was strictly professional. There wasn't even the slightest trace of warmth. I calmly told her that this was the proposal she had requested. I forced my voice to stay steady. Then, I placed the document on her desk. She took it and opened the file. Her eyes immediately moved across the pages. Her slender fingers turned the paper with effortless precision. The silence inside the office was almost terrifying. The only sound was the soft rustling of pages as she reviewed my work. I stood there awkwardly. I couldn't exactly leave, but standing there wasn't any better. I was completely uncomfortable. She examined every detail with serious focus. Then her eyes suddenly stopped on a particular line. Her elegant brows tightened slightly. My heart immediately jumped into my throat. Had I made a mistake? She pointed at the page with one slender fingertip. Her voice remained calm and composed, but beneath that calm tone, I could detect something extremely subtle, a warning that was almost impossible to notice. She pointed out that the sources for the data weren't clearly labeled. She instructed me to correct it after the meeting. I immediately agreed. I quickly took the document back after she finished reviewing it. She handed the file back to me. And throughout the entire process, she didn't look at me even once. Then she calmly told me I could leave. I picked up the document. I turned around and immediately prepared to disappear from that office. My hand had barely touched the doorknob when I heard her voice behind me, clearly struggling to maintain its composure. But underneath that cold exterior, her voice sounded strangely nervous. The moment I heard her mention last night, I froze in place. Here we go. I froze, then slowly turned around. The Ice Queen CEO was still keeping her head down. She pretended to be completely absorbed in another document. But the tips of her ears were already starting to turn red. She paused for a moment. Then she spoke faster and quieter than before. She insisted that she remembered absolutely nothing, and she strongly suggested that I forget everything too. The moment she finished, she waved her hand impatiently. basically ordering me to get out before she died of embarrassment. Her attitude was incredibly forceful, but if you looked closely, you could see the fingers holding her pen. She was gripping it so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Talk about making the evidence even more obvious. Honestly, boss, your acting skills were terrible. I stared at her, pretending to be calm while secretly panicking. She was freaking out, and it was painfully obvious. That same urge to laugh from last night immediately came rushing back. I even started getting the mischievous urge to poke at her secret. So instead of leaving, I walked 2 steps back toward her. I stopped right in front of her desk. She clearly sensed me getting closer. Her body stiffened ever so slightly, but she stubbornly refused to look up. I leaned forward, closing the distance between us. Then I lowered my voice so only the two of us could hear. There was a faint smile in my voice. I quietly asked whether she had really forgotten everything. If she remembered nothing at all, then surely she didn't remember calling me her exclusive boyfriend either. My words hit her like a pebble thrown into perfectly still water. The reaction was instant. The Ice Queen suddenly snapped her head up. Her beautiful eyes were filled with shock. And beneath that shock was the unmistakable panic of someone whose lie had just been exposed. Her pale cheeks instantly turned bright red. The redness spread all the way down her neck. She looked like a cat that had just been caught by the tail. She nearly jumped straight out of her chair. Her voice even changed pitch when she reacted. She immediately accused me of talking nonsense, but she couldn't even maintain eye contact. She kept looking everywhere except at me. Her hands subconsciously tightened around the documents on her desk. She was squeezing the papers so hard they started to crumple. I calmly reminded her that whether I was joking or not, she knew the truth better than anyone. Seeing her reaction gave me even more confidence. My courage suddenly started climbing. Apparently, teasing my boss was ridiculously fun. So I planted both hands on her desk. Then I leaned even closer. I deliberately closed the distance between us. From that close, I could clearly see her eyelashes trembling. I lowered my voice again and brought up her wallpaper. Her face immediately became even redder. I casually told her that the picture actually looked pretty good. I especially liked the angle. At that point, I was convinced smoke was about to come out of her head. She desperately tried to defend herself, but her lips were trembling. For several seconds, she couldn't even form a complete sentence. All that sharp-tongued confidence she usually had, that commanding, never take no for an answer attitude, had completely vanished. All that remained was visible panic and embarrassment. She looked like a kid who had just been caught red-handed doing something they weren't supposed to do. And honestly, that contrast was ridiculously adorable. My own heart was racing too. But I forced myself to stay composed. This time, I needed to get the truth out of her. I finally put away my playful expression. Then I looked directly into her eyes. I asked seriously, "So, what exactly did that breakup call last night mean? And more importantly, when exactly had we ever been together?" That question seemed to make her even more flustered. She lowered her head. Her fingers unconsciously twisted the edge of her clothes. Her voice came out so quietly it was almost a whisper, and there was a faint trace of grievance in it. She explained that she had heard something from her best friend. Apparently, her friend had seen me laughing happily with the new girl at the reception desk. We had even left work together. The new girl at the reception desk. Then I remembered. Her computer had broken yesterday afternoon. I happened to walk past and stopped to help her fix it. After that, we simply took the elevator downstairs together. When I heard the whole explanation, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So she had actually assumed I was interested in another woman, then got drunk, called me, and broke up with me. Before marching straight to my apartment, I summarized the entire situation in the bluntest way possible. And the moment I did, the Ice Queen lowered her head even further. That silent admission somehow made me both furious and ready to laugh. I sighed, and the moment I saw her like that, my heart completely melted. All the anger I had left was gone in an instant. I couldn't help but tease her. Where did that sharp, confident boss from the office go? She immediately shot back that those were two completely different things. She suddenly raised her head to defend herself. But then I noticed her eyes were actually starting to turn red. She looked like she'd just suffered the greatest injustice in human history. She insisted that she was obviously smart when it came to work. But when it came to falling for someone, apparently even the smartest person could become an absolute idiot. She never actually said those words out loud, but I understood exactly what she meant. Suddenly, every strange thing that had happened finally made sense. That ridiculous breakup call from last night wasn't really a breakup at all. It was just her clumsy way of testing how I felt about her. And when she later rushed over to my place, she'd actually been trying to confess her feelings. My heart felt like it had been dropped into warm water. Soft, warm, almost painfully full. All the thoughts I had about teasing her disappeared completely. In their place came an overwhelming mixture of affection, sympathy, and secret happiness. Who would have thought the untouchable CEO, the woman who could intimidate an entire company, would fall for someone this carefully and awkwardly? So this was what being loved by her felt like. For the first time, I called her by her full name, Bai Ningbing. She visibly froze. Her eyes were already wet as she looked at me, and I could see how nervous she was. I explained that I had only fixed the receptionist's computer because I happened to be there. It was nothing more than a casual favor. I gave her the explanation slowly and clearly, 1 point at a time. I told her that besides work-related communication, I hadn't exchanged a single unnecessary word with the new receptionist. The moment she heard that, her eyes gradually lit up. They practically sparkled like someone had scattered stars inside them. Seeing that reaction, I couldn't resist moving closer. I leaned in until our faces were almost touching. I could feel her nervous breathing getting faster. So I asked her with a grin, "Then what exactly were you jealous about?" I deliberately paused for effect. Then I dragged out the last part of my sentence, adding just enough teasing to make the situation even more dangerous. Her face turned an even deeper shade of red. She instinctively tried to retreat. Unfortunately for her, the desk was directly behind her. She immediately denied being jealous. Classic. Her mouth refused to admit it, but the tiny smile tugging at her lips and the light in her eyes betrayed everything. She was completely exposed. I reminded her that if she wasn't jealous, she wouldn't have secretly used my picture as her phone wallpaper. And if she wasn't jealous, she certainly wouldn't have drunk herself silly and called me to break up. Yet she still stubbornly insisted she wasn't jealous. So I pushed the final button. She clearly wanted me to become her exclusive boyfriend. With every point I made, I moved one step closer. Her breathing became faster and faster. Her eyes started darting everywhere. She suddenly had absolutely nowhere to look. I looked straight into her eyes and asked if she intended to keep her promise. At that distance, I could clearly see her lips trembling slightly. I swallowed and felt the tension hanging between us. Even my voice came out slightly hoarse. She nervously asked what exactly I meant. Her voice was trembling now. She hesitantly started talking about making me hers. I couldn't help but let out a quiet laugh. After all, I wasn't about to let that kiss go unpaid. Her eyelashes started trembling like crazy. She closed her eyes, then suddenly opened them again. It looked like she had finally made up her mind. Then, without warning, she grabbed my tie and yanked me down with surprising force. The pull was so strong, I nearly lost my balance and went straight down with her. She tilted her face up toward me. Her entire face was bright red. Yet she desperately tried to make her eyes look intimidating. Honestly, she looked less like a terrifying CEO and more like a tiny kitten trying to act tough. Still gripping my tie, she demanded that I answer immediately. She wanted to know whether I was actually willing to be with her. The tie was digging painfully into my neck. But inside, I felt like fireworks were exploding. I was absolutely loving every second of it. The way she tried to look fierce and demanding, while secretly panicking harder than anyone I'd ever seen, was honestly way too cute to be legal. I stared into her eyes from only inches away. They were filled with nervousness, anticipation, and a desperate hope for my answer. I couldn't stop myself from smiling. I simply let her keep pulling on my tie. Then, I asked with a playful smile, "Is this your way of confessing to me?" She instantly told me to stop talking nonsense, her face turning even redder. She avoided my eyes, clearly embarrassed. But instead of loosening her grip, she grabbed my tie even tighter and demanded an answer. So, naturally, I asked, willing to do what? I deliberately dragged out the moment just to tease her. She looked completely mortified, her face practically burning with embarrassment. Then she clenched her other hand into a tiny fist, looking ready to punch the answer out of me. She lightly punched me in the chest. There was barely any force behind it. Honestly, it felt more like a kitten scratching me. All right, I'll answer. I finally dropped the teasing and turned serious. I looked directly into her eyes. Then, slowly and deliberately, I gave her a crystal clear answer. From now on, I'll be counting on you. My girlfriend. The hand gripping my tie instantly went slack. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She clearly hadn't expected me to say yes that easily. My reflection was practically shining in her stunned eyes. They were filled with surprise, happiness, and just a tiny bit of disbelief. Then she nodded firmly. Her answer came out crisp and clear. She could barely contain her happiness. At that moment, she wasn't the untouchable CEO anymore. And I wasn't just another employee. The gap between our positions simply disappeared. All that remained was the sweetness and excitement of finally admitting how we felt about each other. The entire office suddenly felt saturated with an awkward, sweet, unmistakably romantic atmosphere. I held her hand. And honestly, I didn't want to let go. She didn't pull away either. Instead, she lowered her head, but that smile on her lips was impossible to hide. I gently rubbed the back of her hand with my thumb. Her skin was soft and smooth. I looked at her. So, does this mean we're officially dating at the office now? She immediately raised her head. She shot me an annoyed look. But her eyes were practically overflowing with laughter. Then she reminded me that we had to keep our relationship secret at work. No one could know. We had to keep it completely under wraps. I immediately nodded. I gave her the classic, "Don't worry, I got you" look. That made her laugh again. She gently pushed me away. "Now go back to work." "Yes, ma'am." I released her hand. Then I gave her a dramatic little salute. I walked toward the door. But before leaving, I turned around and gave her a playful wink. "See you later, girlfriend." Her face instantly turned bright red again. She grabbed a folder from her desk and looked ready to launch it straight at me. "Get out!" she ordered, while I laughed and slipped out of the office. The second the door closed behind me, I leaned against the wall. The grin on my face immediately went completely out of control. I was no longer single. And my girlfriend was the CEO. Bai Ningbing herself. I finally returned to my desk, but something was seriously wrong with me. Every word on my computer screen looked like it had pink hearts floating around it. My supervisor walked over. He stared at me suspiciously. "Fang Yan, why are you so damn happy? Something good happened to you?" No. I immediately forced my expression back to normal. He gave me one extremely suspicious look, then finally walked away. I slapped my cheeks and forced myself to calm down. Except, I couldn't calm down at all. So I pulled out my phone. I stared at the chat that had previously been used for nothing but work. Her profile picture was still that cold, professional side portrait, the same intimidating CEO image she used for everything. I hesitated for a second. Then I finally sent her a little emoji. It was a cute puppy. A tiny puppy nervously poking its head out. And almost immediately, my phone vibrated. She had already sent me a picture. It was a screenshot of her desktop. Right there in the middle of the screen, she had drawn a huge, crooked little heart with the built-in drawing tool. The mighty CEO was secretly sitting at her desk drawing hearts with the most basic software imaginable. That gap between her terrifying CEO persona and this adorable side of her was simply unfair. I nearly burst out laughing right there at my desk. I immediately typed back, "Your CEO persona is completely ruined." Her reply came almost instantly. "Mind your own business." She even attached an obviously tsundere reaction sticker. I stared at that sticker and laughed to myself for what felt like forever. Then I quietly changed her contact name. I changed it from Iceberg to My Baby. The second I saw the new name, even I felt my face heating up. It was ridiculously cheesy, but damn, it felt good. And that was how our company gained a brand new miracle. There I was in the planning department, staring at my monitor, randomly breaking into the most suspicious, idiotically happy grin. Meanwhile, inside the CEO's office, the CEO seemed to be in an unusually good mood that day. A supervisor who walked in to deliver some documents actually caught the CEO smiling at her phone. For a second, he genuinely thought his eyes were malfunctioning. All day long, my new girlfriend and I secretly messaged each other. At lunch, we decided to eat together. A new Japanese restaurant had just opened downstairs. She worried that going there together on our very first day as a couple might look a little too obvious. "My baby!" "Then don't come. I'll go by myself." Naturally, that plan lasted about 5 minutes. At lunch, I pretended to run into her at the Japanese restaurant. Then I nervously asked if I could share her table. The coworkers around us immediately looked at me with sympathy, like I had just been summoned for a private execution by the CEO. But underneath the table, her foot casually brushed against mine. Then she deliberately nudged me. "Right? In the calf." I nearly dropped the sushi in my hand. I almost shoved an entire pile of wasabi straight up my nose. Meanwhile, she calmly lowered her head and sipped her soup. A tiny, smug smile appeared at the corner of her lips. At that point, the mighty CEO's cold persona had officially shattered into pieces. It felt like I was secretly carrying a priceless treasure in my arms. I wanted to show it off to everyone. But at the same time, I was terrified someone might notice and take it away. And that feeling was surprisingly torturous, especially whenever I saw her working normally with other male coworkers. They were just doing their jobs. I knew that. But a tiny spark of jealousy and insecurity still kept creeping into my mind. That afternoon, I went to deliver an urgent document to her. It needed the CEO's signature immediately. But when I reached her office, I saw the director of the R&D department standing beside her desk. At least, that's what I told myself. The guy was a talented PhD, recruited from overseas. Young, accomplished, and annoyingly good-looking. And apparently, his family was pretty well off too. Worst of all, the way he looked at my girlfriend was filled with completely undisguised admiration. My heart immediately sank. A sour feeling started bubbling inside me. It was like carbonated jealousy fizzing up in my chest. Bubble after bubble. I knocked on the door. My girlfriend immediately looked up and saw me. For just a split second, her eyes softened. Then she instantly switched back into her professional CEO mode. The R&D director also turned toward me and gave me a polite nod. His smile was calm and friendly, but somehow I couldn't shake the feeling there was something else behind it. I tried not to overthink it. I simply handed my girlfriend the document. I deliberately kept my eyes straight ahead. She quickly scanned the document and signed it. The R&D director remained standing beside her. Then he smiled and spoke to her with an irritating level of familiarity. He said they'd proceed with the current plan. There was also an evening video conference that required her final confirmation, and the way he spoke to her so naturally made my back teeth itch. The R&D director thanked her and glanced at me once more, before finally turning around and leaving. The office door closed behind him. My girlfriend handed the signed document back to me, but I was still standing there. She looked at me in confusion. "Is there something else?" I looked at her. That flawless face of hers somehow made my mood even worse. "The two of you are having a meeting tonight?" I tried to sound casual, but the jealousy was obvious, even to me. She froze for a second. Then she seemed to understand exactly what was bothering me. A tiny smile appeared at the corner of her lips. But she deliberately put on her cold CEO expression. "Fang Yan, it's working hours." I took the document and turned around. But that little spark of jealousy and the insecurity it dragged along with it only grew stronger. Yeah. She was the CEO. People like that R&D director were exactly the kind of elite who surrounded her every day. And then there was me. Just an ordinary employee. Sure, I was pretty good looking. But what else did I really have to offer? What did she actually see in me? Could this relationship really last? What if I was only something new and exciting to her? Wait. My phone suddenly vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out to check. It was a message from my sweetheart. She told me her evening meeting would start at 8. It should last no more than an hour. Then came another message from my sweetheart. She said that once the meeting was over, she wanted the tomato and egg noodles I cooked for her. And then she sent another one. This time, it was a ridiculous sticker of someone pinching their nose in jealousy. Whatever gloom had been weighing on my heart vanished instantly after those 3 little messages. She had noticed something was wrong, and she was still trying to cheer me up. I looked up. She was sitting there with her head lowered, pretending to read a document. But the tips of her ears were already turning red. I couldn't help but smile. I quickly typed back. "Sure, I'll add 2 extra eggs." Somehow, my relationship with the Ice Queen had entered a whole new phase, and honestly, I wasn't complaining. We still kept our relationship completely under wraps at the company. But that awkward uncertainty between us, and all those little tests and hesitations, were gone, replaced by something much better: warmth and certainty. She still occasionally sent me cute, completely random messages. Sometimes they were so weird that I had no idea what she was thinking. Whenever I brought her coffee, she would secretly finish it. Then she'd send me a simple thumbs-up sticker like I had just completed a legendary quest. After work, we sometimes acted like an ordinary couple. We'd go watch a movie, take long walks together, or just curl up inside my tiny rented apartment. She would work through her documents while I played games beside her. We didn't bother each other, Yet somehow the entire room felt ridiculously sweet. It was such an ordinary, genuine kind of love that sometimes I felt like I was walking on clouds. Light, soft, almost unreal. Until one day, the Ice Queen suddenly dropped a bomb on me. She asked me to go home with her that weekend. I happened to be drinking Coke when she said it. The soda went straight down the wrong pipe. I started coughing like I was fighting for my life. I coughed so hard that tears actually came out of my eyes. She calmly patted my back. Her tone remained completely casual. She sounded like she was talking about the weather. My parents want to meet you. Meet her parents already? I hadn't mentally prepared for anything like this. I started panicking. Wait! I'm meeting them already? What am I supposed to wear? What gift should I bring? What is your mom like? And what does she hate? She watched me completely lose my composure. And she couldn't stop herself from laughing. She told me not to be nervous. It was just a simple family dinner. A simple dinner? I nearly raised my voice. Those are your parents! What if they don't like me? What if they think I stole their precious daughter away? What if they throw me out? She reached over and gently pinched my cheek. Her eyes curved into a warm smile. She reassured me that she would be there. If her parents really dared to throw me out, she'd leave with me. Easy for her to say. I still spent the entire night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Then, the weekend finally arrived. I put on the most expensive suit I owned. I brought the carefully chosen gifts I'd prepared. Then I followed her toward her family's home. Her family lived in an elegant villa. Surprisingly, it wasn't the flashy billionaire mansion I'd imagined. Instead, it had a refined, scholarly atmosphere. The person who opened the door was her mother. She was a graceful, gentle-looking woman with an incredibly warm presence. She greeted us with a kind smile. I immediately bowed 90 degrees and greeted her. My voice came out so loud it probably scared every bird sitting on the trees outside. Beside me, my girlfriend covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. Her mother froze for a second. Then she burst into laughter. She warmly welcomed me inside. Then she asked if I was Fang Yan. She said her daughter had mentioned me quite a lot. Wait, she'd been talking about me? I immediately looked toward my girlfriend. She simply winked at me. I followed her into the living room. And that's when I noticed a middle-aged man sitting on the sofa, wearing thin-rimmed glasses. He looked extremely serious. He was quietly reading a newspaper, looking exactly like the final boss of the family. That had to be my girlfriend's father. My heart immediately jumped back into my throat. I gave him another 90-degree bow. Hello, sir! Her father slowly lifted his head from the newspaper. His sharp eyes scanned me from head to toe. His face remained completely expressionless. He simply gave a quiet, My heart sank. Damn, he definitely didn't like me. The entire dinner felt like I was sitting on a bed of nails. Thankfully, her mother was incredibly warm. She kept piling food onto my plate. And then came the interrogation. How many people were in my family? What did my parents do for a living? What did I usually do in my free time? I answered every question honestly. Meanwhile, my palms were sweating like crazy. Her father barely said a word. He just quietly ate his meal. Every now and then, he'd glance at me. Every one of those looks felt like I was presenting a billion-dollar business proposal to a chairman who could reject me with a single word. The pressure was absolutely insane. After dinner, her mother took my girlfriend into the kitchen to cut some fruit. That left me alone in the living room with her father. The atmosphere instantly froze. My back was already soaked in sweat. Her father put down his teacup and looked directly at me. Finally, he spoke. His voice was deep and calm. "Xiao Feng." I immediately straightened up. "Yes, sir?" My posture became rigid. I looked like a schoolboy waiting for the teacher to call on him. He said he'd heard that I was pretty good at gaming. As he pushed his glasses up, I couldn't help wondering, wait, this isn't the conversation I expected. I cautiously admitted that I was decent. I wasn't about to start flexing in front of my future father-in-law. He asked about that popular mobile game. Then he asked what rank I was. He was talking about King of Glory. I figured I could finally flex a little. For a split second, his eyes actually lit up. But he quickly returned to his serious expression. He admitted that he was stuck at the Star Brilliance rank and couldn't climb any higher. And suddenly, everything clicked. I looked at him and hesitated. "Sir, how about we play one game? Maybe I can figure out what's holding you back." I carefully tested the waters. Her father simply nodded. "Let's do it!" A moment later, I was sitting shoulder to shoulder with my future father-in-law on the couch. And our father-in-law's son-in-law gaming session officially began. And then, when my girlfriend and her mother returned with a plate of fruit, they found the two of us practically glued together, heads down over the phones. We were intensely discussing how to play the next team fight. Her mother looked like she'd just confirmed everything she already suspected. She turned to my girlfriend with a knowing smile. She basically said, "See, I told you, you picked the right boyfriend." Apparently, I'd finally found someone capable of fixing her terrible gaming skills. My girlfriend could only laugh awkwardly at the whole situation. On the way home, I was still trying to process what had just happened. "So, your dad accepted me because I'm good at gaming? That's what finally won him over?" Honestly, that reason sounded completely insane to me. She smiled and wrapped her arm around mine. "Partly. But there's something more important." She told me her father could tell that I genuinely cared about her. I asked what he liked about me. She said he liked that I was sincere and never pretended to be someone I wasn't, and that I had a genuine spark in my eyes. She rested her head against my shoulder. Most importantly, she said I could make her happy. And to her, that was enough. My heart instantly felt warm. I pulled her closer. Just like that, I had somehow cleared the terrifying meet the parents boss fight. Turns out, being cracked at gaming really could come in handy in real life. From that point on, life felt like coffee with extra sugar. There was still a slight bitterness underneath it all, enough to keep me grounded. But somehow, that made the aftertaste even sweeter. Our secret office romance continued quietly behind the scenes. And surprisingly, we were getting away with it. Most of that was thanks to my boss girlfriend's elite acting skills. As for me, I did my best to stay disciplined. I couldn't exactly stare at her every 5 seconds. But when you're deep in love, that kind of chemistry is ridiculously hard to hide. More than once, coworkers accidentally caught us together. Sometimes they'd walk into the break room and find me with my boss. And the atmosphere would instantly become suspiciously awkward. Other times, I'd be reporting on my work, and my boss would struggle so hard to hide the smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Before long, the company's anonymous forum started getting interesting. Before long, the company's anonymous forum was filled with all kinds of wild speculation. The Ice Queen CEO has been looking unusually cheerful lately. Do you think something's going on? I'll bet 50 cents the boss is definitely dating someone. Has anyone else noticed that handsome guy from the planning department has been looking unusually radiant lately? Wait, are you saying they're... Hey, don't jump to conclusions. There is no way the boss would fall for some ordinary employee. I've read through those posts, and my feelings were complicated. Part of me was secretly enjoying the attention, but another part worried that those rumors might cause trouble for her. The Ice Queen, however, remained completely unfazed. Whenever she came across one of those posts, she'd screenshot it and send it straight to me. Then she'd casually add, "They're only half right." I asked, "Which half?" She replied, "They're right that you're handsome. And as for the other half, I didn't simply fall for some ordinary employee. I fell in love with a guy named Fang Yan, an adorable idiot who somehow managed to steal my heart." At that point, I had to admit it. My boss had completely maxed out her flirting skill. But secrets never stay secret forever. The quarterly company meeting arrived. Everyone in the company gathered inside the main conference room. The Ice Queen stood on stage, delivering her quarterly report. Her presence was overwhelming. She owned the entire stage. I sat quietly among the employees, and I watched that confident woman standing above everyone else, looking completely in control of everything. I couldn't help feeling proud. At the same time, there was a strange little feeling I couldn't quite explain. Someone this incredible was really my girlfriend? During the break, I decided to take a quick walk to the break room. But the moment I reached the door, I heard several coworkers talking inside. Their voices weren't particularly loud, but the mocking tone was impossible to miss. "Did you guys see those posts on the forum? They're saying the boss and that guy from the planning department, Fang Yan, have something going on." "Haha, no way. What does Fang Yan have besides that pretty face?" "I'm guessing the boss is just having some fun with him. Once the novelty wears off, she'll dump him. Maybe he's just trying to use her to skip 20 years of hard work." Ha 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 ha. Honestly, that's probably it. The things they said became more disgusting with every sentence. I'd had enough. I suddenly shoved the door open. BANG. The coworkers inside jumped in shock. Then they turned around and saw me. Their faces instantly shifted from arrogance to awkward panic. "Fang Yan! When did you get here?" I stared at them coldly. "Repeat exactly what you were just saying." My voice was cold enough to freeze the room. "Go ahead. Say it again." The group exchanged nervous glances. Clearly, none of them expected me to hear any of it. One guy, who was usually loud and careless, stepped forward. Apparently, his pride couldn't handle being cornered. He forced himself to act tough. "What? Did we say something wrong? Can you honestly say you're not just living off the boss?" He didn't even get to finish. I struck first. The break room instantly erupted into chaos. Then a cold, commanding voice suddenly rang out from the doorway. "Stop! Right now!" Every single person froze. We all turned toward the door. The Ice Queen was standing there. Her expression was ice cold. Several senior executives stood behind her, clearly drawn there by the commotion. Her eyes swept across the trashed break room before finally landing on me. Her brows tightened. Her expression became complicated. The loudmouthed immediately saw his chance. He tried to play the victim first. "Boss, Fang Yan suddenly barged in here and started beating people for no reason." The Ice Queen didn't even acknowledge him. She walked straight toward me. Her eyes immediately noticed the marks on my face. She suppressed her anger as she spoke. "What happened?" I calmly told her everything that had happened, from beginning to end. The moment she finished listening, her gaze darkened. She turned toward the coworkers. Her eyes were as sharp as ice. "Is everything he said true?" Her voice wasn't loud, but the pressure behind it was suffocating. The group immediately started stammering. Not one of them dared answer. Good, the Ice Queen said with a cold smile. You were hired by this company. Was the company paying you to whisper behind people's backs? One of them hurriedly tried to claim they were only joking. Another coworker desperately jumped in to defend them, but Bai Ningbing cut him off before he could finish. Her voice turned even colder. She made it clear that if they wanted to keep their jobs, they had picked the wrong people to mess with. Then she pulled out her phone. Without wasting another second, she called the HR director. She ordered him to come straight to the second-floor break room. Then she told him to prepare 3 termination contracts. The 3 loudmouths went pale instantly. Their confidence had just rage quit the server. They immediately begged Bai Ningbing to give them another chance, admitting they had been wrong. But Bai Ningbing didn't even bother answering them. She simply ended the call. Then, with everyone staring in stunned silence, she turned toward me. She gently reached out with her fingertips, carefully straightening the clothes I had messed up during the fight. She fixed every little wrinkle. Her movements were incredibly gentle, and the concern in her eyes was impossible to hide. The entire break room fell completely silent. Everyone stared at me like they had just witnessed a plot twist nobody saw coming. Even I was stunned. Bai Ningbing looked at me and let out a helpless sigh. There was a hint of blame in her voice, but somehow it was softer than anything I had ever heard from her. She wondered why I had to be so impulsive. What if I had gotten seriously hurt? I could only stare at her, completely frozen. Then, in the very next second, she did something that made every person in that room mentally uninstall their common sense. She rose onto her toes, right in front of the entire company. She leaned in and gave me a soft kiss. Then she confidently wrapped her arm around mine. She turned toward the completely stunned employees surrounding us. And with absolutely zero hesitation, she made the announcement loud and clear. She introduced me by name as her boyfriend. Then she warned everyone that anyone who dared gossip about us again would have to face her cold, merciless stare. And this time, termination would be the least of their problems. Just like that, our relationship was exposed. Not quietly, not gracefully. It happened in the most dramatic and ridiculously satisfying way possible. I looked at the woman holding my arm so tightly, and suddenly, everything felt unreal. I felt lucky. All the anger I had carried just moments earlier was completely drowned out by the overwhelming love I felt for her. At that moment, I realized something simple. If I had her, what more could I possibly ask for? As for those 3 loudmouths, their little performance ended right there. From that day forward, my relationship with Bai Ningbing was officially public. The company forum exploded with gossip for several days. Some people were jealous. Some genuinely congratulated us. And, of course, there were always a few salty haters. But after what happened in the break room, nobody dared take things too far. After all, everyone knew our CEO had a legendary reputation for protecting her own. Then came the company's annual celebration at the end of the year. The highlight was the lucky draw. The grand prize was an actual sports car. When the hosts began announcing the winning number, I froze. Because somehow, against all odds, that number belonged to me. Still completely stunned, I walked onto the stage to claim my prize. And, naturally, Bai Ningbing herself stepped onto the stage as CEO to present me with the grand prize. She placed the car keys directly into my hand. Then, while we shook hands, she secretly scratched the palm of my hand with her fingertips. Then she faced the microphone. With a perfectly professional smile, she congratulated me in front of everyone. She even joked that I seemed to be having incredible luck. The audience immediately erupted in applause. I couldn't help smiling. I took the microphone and looked directly at her. I made sure my eyes said what my words couldn't. I agreed that I really was lucky. After all, I had drawn the best prize of the night. But the truth was, the sports car wasn't even the best prize I had won. That prize came after the annual party ended. Bai Ningbing had drunk quite a bit. So I wrapped my arm around her and walked her home. On the way, she leaned comfortably against my chest. Then she looked up at me and quietly asked whether I still felt I wasn't good enough for her. I lowered my head and kissed her gently on the forehead. She smiled, completely satisfied, and snuggled even deeper into my arms. The moonlight fell over the two of us. Our shadows stretched endlessly across the road. Then she softly called my name. She looked at me and asked me to marry her. My footsteps stopped instantly. My heart felt like it had just been hit by a truck. I lowered my head and looked at her. Her eyes were shining brightly. She was clearly drunk, but beneath that drunken haze was genuine seriousness and undeniable anticipation. I smiled and pulled her even tighter against me. I told her that proposing was a pretty important moment, and maybe she could at least let me prepare properly. She gave an unhappy little hum. Apparently, nobody had ever told her that marriage proposals had to follow a rulebook. And as I looked at her and quietly asked for one chance to make this right. She finally agreed, pretending to be annoyed, even though that little smile gave her away. She raised her chin with that classic tsundere attitude, acting like she was the one doing me a favor. Under the streetlight, we looked at each other and laughed, both knowing that somehow we had made it this far. The road ahead was still long, and honestly, I had no idea what the future would throw at us. But as long as she stayed by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. Because from that night on, every single day of my life was destined to be ridiculously sweet. And I wasn't complaining.